Welcome in, college fantasy football family and friends. You're listening, watching the CFF Site's Week 12 podcast. My name's Joe DeSalvo, the voice of the CFF Site, and I'm going to get us through another show this week. Season's coming to a close. Here we are, Money Weeks, guys. Semifinals. If you're in any type of head-to-head format, more than likely you are in the semifinal week. If you play in a cumulative points total league, you are in the second to last week of your season, more than likely. And if you've been eliminated, look, you're always welcome to come along for a ride. Hopefully you've been with us every week this season, and going to get you through another show this week and kind of give you an idea of what we're looking for. I'm sure if, some of you guys that have been eliminated up until this point, maybe you've got some buddies, some friends that are going at it in your league, and you have an interest to see who kind of sees this through. But we're going to go through the schedule. But the first thing that I'm going to start off with is the topic of a lot of emails that I've seen, and maybe not necessarily the topic, but sort of the sense, the pulse of those of you guys that are still alive in the college fantasy football playoffs. I'm getting a sense of this in the emails, some of the DMs I get into Discord, but it has to do with lineup setting, and I get it. Here we are. I call this the Money Weeks, right? We're in the semifinals. I think this is the most important week of the college fantasy football season because, as I say, you win this week, you're guaranteed a nice payday. And so what I have noticed through many of the emails, many of the messages coming in, is that some of you guys are really, really thinking this through, double, triple guessing yourselves. And that happens every year around this time. And if I could give you guys just a little bit of advice going into this weekend's matchups, and I know some of you all out there are coming off. You've got MAC action that's taken place Tuesday and Wednesday already. We'll have Thursday and Friday games, so hopefully you'll give this a listen before the weekend. But don't overthink it. There's a couple of different philosophies I'm going to discuss here, and I think this is really appropriate given the timing of the show and when it's posted, and given the fact that there's some players in your roster, particularly if you play in full FBS leagues, that have already played. And so, this is what I'm feeling in a lot of the emails and messages that I'm getting. But a lot of you guys are overthinking it, I think. I think at this particular point, I have two philosophies when it comes down to picking players for my starting lineup, particularly you guys that have done an excellent job building your roster depth and getting to this point and being in a spot where you can really, really use that. And some of you guys have some tough decisions. But there are some of you guys that are really, I think, overthinking it. And, sometimes you've got to stick with the players that got you here. And that's my philosophy more times than not. Look, there's two ways that you can play it this weekend. And that is, particularly if you're in a spot where you're not sure whether to pick player A versus player B. You may be, player A may be a guy that you invested a high draft pick with. He's been busting it for you all year long. I'll throw out maybe Kenneth Walker, for example, right? Who's been tearing it up, but he's got a decent, he's got a matchup against a solid Ohio State defense this week. And you have another guy out there that maybe the matchup is just a little sweeter. And you're second guessing on who you should play this week. You've swapped these guys in and out of your lineup. I have a philosophy when it comes to these situations sometimes. All things considered equal, if I cannot make a decision, I usually stick with the guy that's got me there. I stick with the guy that I invested a high pick in. I invested a guy that, my stud has been there. He's got a tremendous ceiling, and, he could go for 2 or 3 touchdowns in any given week. And I'd rather be wrong by starting him and losing out on the player that had a good matchup. Now, look, there's 2 ways of looking at it, right? Because college fantasy football, if there's another part of it, it's also reading the matchups and starting the right guy when you have the right matchup. But if I started a guy based on the matchup and my stud, the guy that got me there, is on my bench at the end of the week and I lose that week, I'm going to have a hard time getting over that one. I have an easier time getting over when knowing that, hey, man, the guy that got me to the dance, I'm going with him. I'm riding him. I rode him all year. He's got me to this point. He's the guy that I got to put my faith in. That's who I'm choosing more times than not, because that loss is a little bit more palatable than it is if I just played the matchup game and I missed. I never like to lose with my A-team guy or my stud on the bench. I'll feel terrible if I lose either way. And I'll, if I start my stud and the guy with the great matchup goes off, I'll tell myself, man, I knew I had the matchup. I should have rolled with that. But all things considered equal, when it's the other way around and I lose with my stud on the bench that would have gotten me a win, that one really is hard to get over, because that was the guy that got me there most of the year. So that's, those are the type of decisions that are going on this week. And I've seen a lot of you guys double, triple guessing yourself, going back and forth. A lot of the emails were coming in hot and heavy early in the week, which I usually ask you guys to wait for the projections to play out. For you guys that had MAC games, MAC players going on that are in power, full FBS leagues, I completely get it. Tried to get to as many as those as I could. I know you hit up Mike as well this week. So he and I have both been trying to crush in these emails, trying to help you guys out for these midweek games, which leads me to my next point. And, this goes into the thought process when I'm trying to pick players for this weekend's game. There are going to be some of you guys in positions this week where you've gotten off to a really nice start in full FBS leagues because of particular MAC players. And there's going to be some guys that haven't gotten off to a really good start because maybe your guy that you started or a couple of guys you started during the week haven't gone off. I always say, whenever you're sending me questions about your roster builds going into the weekend, when you're asking me about one guy versus another, sometimes it's not simply just picking player A over player B. I always like to get an idea of what's the rest of your roster build like. Give me an idea of who your opponent's going to be throwing out there. Do you need to be conservative with this play, or do you need to be aggressive with it? That's all, all of that will dictate which player I would suggest for you, because if you need to be aggressive and sort of that boom or bust player, you're going up against the number one seed, or maybe this weekend you had a couple of players with subpar performances in the middle of the week, you've got to be really aggressive. You've got to go for those high ceiling, low floor players. Boom or bust players is what I like to call it. For some of you guys that have gotten out to a nice start, maybe you've had a Bryant Koback, maybe you've gotten a Lou Nichols in your lineup this week. You're off to a really strong start. And for some of you guys, maybe you've gotten two and you're sitting really pretty. But, then all of a sudden now you have one roster spot that you can't make up your mind. You're going into the weekend with a 40-point lead. And now all of a sudden you may want to play it a little bit more conservatively and start the player with the higher floor, as opposed to maybe rolling the dice. Some players out there this weekend may have to roll the dice with a Jerome Ford for Cincinnati based on where they're at going into the weekend. There's going to be guys out there that have Jerome Ford in their lineups that have gotten off to a nice start that may want to think about just giving him the week off because we want to see him play. You don't want to take a chance of getting that goose egg when you're off to a nice start. So I say this, guys, because all of these scenarios matter going into a semifinal week in the college fantasy football playoffs. It's just not as simple as starting player A versus player B. And that's why when I ask you guys to send in the emails, when you send Mike and I a message on, who should I pick? Give us the format. Is it PPR? Is it half point PPR? Is it non-PPR? Is it 4.6 points TD passing? What's the rest of your lineup look like? Who are you playing this week? Are you playing a number one seed and you're the number 4 seed, maybe number 5? How aggressive do you need to be with this pick? That all dictates who we're going to suggest. We're not always right, but we're going to try to give you the insight that we can give you based on our experience on whether or not you should be aggressive or be conservative with that pick, and try to help steer you in the right direction to put you in a spot to make the best decision that you can going into the weekend. And I get it. There's going to be some of you, half of you guys out there are going to be ecstatic you made the right call, or maybe you made the wrong call and survived. And there's going to be some of you out there that just made the wrong call, one or two players away, maybe an injury during a game away, and you would have had it. It's going to happen. It happens every year. It's the pains and joys of fantasy football playoffs in the head-to-head format. And so that's the intro. That's what I'm going to lead this week's show off with, that we're not going to go into a ton of the matchups this week because a lot of you guys up until this point have finished your season. And before I get into doing anything else, the one thing I mentioned, I'm going to get and update you guys on the 4-1 Super Fantasy League because that is winding down as well. And I want to recognize you guys. It's been a couple of weeks since I have done that. Is pay attention to the site. I have made the decision that it looks like we are going to get the bowl fantasy leagues up and running again. There'll be a limited number of leagues in which we will get together. I'm guessing we'll probably have somewhere between 8 to 12 leagues, depending on how fast we can put them together, how fast Mike and I can get the college fantasy bowl guide put together. For all of you guys that came in at the Heisman level from the beginning, when you had your membership, you guys are going to get that bowl season, fantasy bowl season preview guide emailed to your inbox. We're going to send it out to you guys. But we're going to have the bowl season fantasy guide. We're going to have picks in there. We're going to go picks against the spread. We're going to do confidence picks. We're going to give you top fantasy plays. We'll have projections attached to that. Mike's going to have DFS write-ups all throughout the bowl season. You came in for the DFS level or Heisman level. You're still going to have access to that. Like I said, there's so much more ready to go. And that bowl season is another season in itself, and it's a 5-6 week condensed season. I know I've mentioned it on this show 2 or 3 times in the past already. Pay attention to the site. If you're in the Discord, pay attention to that. We're going to get those bowl leagues started. When we do, we send the invite out, and it's first come, first served. And when those fill, they fill. Some of them may be $25 buy-ins, some may be 50. We may even do 100 depending on. So different denominations. Going to be first come, first serve. And when those fill, they fill. And I'm just not sure how many we're going to get. But if I had to guess, somewhere around 8 to 12, we should get in. And all of you guys, as long as the dates and the drafts don't conflict, you're welcome to play and participate in as many of them as you'd like. And we do every year get a lot of the same guys that play over and over and over, or in a bunch of different leagues. And last year, unfortunately, we did not get the leagues together. I don't think it was just too much going on. And but this year, normal year, and we're going to get into that. So with that being said, I do want to give a shout out to the 4-1 Super Fantasy League. It has been a really long league. It's been a long season, for some of you guys. I know for some of you all, it kind of comes and goes, and it's over with before you start. But let's get into a little recognition on these leagues. And I really just want to start off with, I'm going to start with the 2 halves tournament, just because that was the one that really kicked things off. And Haynes T76 is sitting there in the championship spot waiting for his opponent next week. He's going to face the winner out of let's see, he's going to face, now this is a real interesting situation. This is the one tournament where I need to go back and double check, because there is a matchup between New Boston and College Football Winning Edge that may actually get reversed based on a Fantrax designation error on one of the players that was supposed to be dropped in best ball. I need to check that out. And I'm hoping to have that bracket, that top half of the semifinal, or the top half of that second half tournament final squared away by later tonight or tomorrow. And either New Boston or College Football Winning Edge will play C Money Bobby 44. And the winner of that matchup this week will face Haynes T76 in the championship of the 2 halves tournament. Going over to head-to-head tournament, different format, this one. It was a 2-week semifinal. The College Football Winning Edge knocked out Blackbeard's Delight to reach the championship against J.K. Doherty, who knocked off Dirty Lou. So College Football Winning Edge and J.K. Doherty will play over weeks 12 and 13 to determine first and second. But congrats to both of you guys. You are right now. This is the one format that the top two teams have already been locked into winning, and college football winning edge. And J.K. Doherty, you'll battle it out for first and second. But congrats to you guys for coming through and reaching the final in this league. Now, in a twist of fate, what's interesting is that college football winning edge knocked out Blackbeard's Delight, who is the defending champion in this league and in the total points league. And right now, Blackbeard's Delight is still holding on to defending his title in the total points league right now. He actually is in first, and college football, Nick Allen, one of the friends of the site, college football winning edge, he's sitting in second right now. Long way to go in that one. I think if you're anywhere in the top 20 right now in that league, you're in position to really make a run if you could put together about a 400-point week this week. Anybody in the top 20 realistically has a shot if they have a monster week. But conservatively speaking, I'd say anybody in the top 5, it's wide open right now amongst you guys right now. And then the other tournament that we have left to go, we've got the Eliminator Tournament. There are 10 teams remaining in the Eliminator. Only 5 will advance to week 13, in which the top 2 teams will be first and second place after next week. The 10 teams still alive in the Eliminator at Devi Warehouse. Greg Brandt, friend of the site, Ag Vet 06, C Money Bobby 44, Franchise KF, Kyle Francis, friend of the site as well in there. J.K. Doherty, some of the same names in multiple tournaments. Jogman 255, Jay Stubbe 13, New Boss, Nick Allen, college football winning edge, and Scared Gopher. Those are your 10 teams in the Eliminator. The top 5 advance this week. Half the field gets eliminated this week. The biggest percentage cut from one week to another this week, half the field will get eliminated. And so there you go. There's your total points, your 2 halves tournament, your head-to-head tournament, and your Eliminator right there. Those are all the results. And good luck to all of you guys that are playing it out this weekend. So as I like to do, we want to get into the matchups. We don't want to forget about you guys. And like I said, there are not many of you guys, or the vast majority of the college fantasy football head-to-head leagues. Most of the teams at this particular point, their season's already come to a close. And so what we're going to do is we're just going to walk down through some of the games this week. We'll just do it conference by conference. We'll start in the group of 5 over in the American Conference as well. The one thing that sticks out at me, Calvin Austin, not fully healthy right now. He just really has not been that great. And I can see a lot of his fantasy owners really doubting putting him in their lineups this weekend. I'm curious to see what you Calvin Austin owners do this weekend in that matchup against Houston. SMU traveling to Cincinnati. Is Jerome Ford ready to rock and roll? Was he held out of last week precaution just to get ready for this matchup? I would assume yes. But nothing's a safe assumption in college fantasy football and college football in general. You just never know what's going to happen. I know just before recording this podcast, we got word that Justin Hall, the receiver for Ball State, who I think has scored like maybe 9 touchdowns over the previous 5 weeks, was in street clothes on the sidelines. And so he was one of those late scratches. That's going to happen throughout the weekend. If you're not in the Discord, you've got to get your ass in there. You've got to pay attention to the injuries. You've got to pay attention to the game day threads, particularly if you're still in leagues, particularly if you're playing in DFS. It's the best way to get the last minute up-to-date injury news in case we don't post anything on the site or it doesn't hit the Twitter feed timeline on our site in time for you to get it up before the game. You have the Heisman and All-American access. You got the Discord invite. If you have that, or if you have not, you're still in a league, reach out to me, get that invite. Let's get you in there because you need to get all the up-to-date information as possible. Let's get into the ACC. Obviously, with Clemson, they held out Shipley last week. He returns this week. Jaquari Roberson now. Question is whether or not will he play in that matchup against Clemson. He only had 1 catch last week for 12 yards. Supposedly, he was banged up. Curious to see what happens right there. Will Sam Howell give it a go against Wofford? And if he does, how will Wofford perform against North Carolina and make this interesting? Do you start your guys for North Carolina? I do think you have to start everyone if they're going to play. And I do think you have to start I do think you have to start Sam Howell as well if he's going to play. You never know what Wofford's going to do, right? We didn't know what Samford was going to do last week against Florida. And I think this is a matchup where you've got to play some of your best players for North Carolina this week, depending on your depth of the roster. Whether or not Brennan Armstrong's still up in the air, we don't know if he's going to be able to go. That's a lot for this matchup. And the reason why Brennan Armstrong is so important to this matchup, if he plays, it's not just because his owners need him. And it's not just because the owners that have maybe a Dontavian Wicks, a Keaton Thompson, Jelani Woods, not only do they need Brennan Armstrong, but I think if you're an owner of Kenny Pickett, Jordan Addison, a Canabanda, a Banacon. Am I saying it wrong? Flubbed that one just when I thought I was on a roll right here. But a Banaconda, the running back for Pitt. The reason why I think it's important for Brennan Armstrong to play is because if he does not, this game could get out of hand early, and we could be looking at Pickett and Pitt's offense maybe shutting down shop after 2.5, 3 quarters. Whereas if Armstrong plays, you're probably going to have to see, Pitt's probably going to have to run up a few more points on the scoreboard. So Brennan Armstrong is definitely a wild card going into the weekend, because I think that will determine how valuable of a play Kenny Pickett and Jordan Addison become going into this weekend. And then from there, Virginia Tech, obviously with the coach being moved, sometimes teams get a bump when they let go of their coach. Look what happened with TCU. Not only did they let go of Patterson, but they made the change to Chandler Morris at quarterback. They got a bump and then knocked off Baylor, but they were at home. TCU was at home in this matchup. Virginia Tech's on the road. And, the week of firing a coach. And I do think that actually could be a great spot and a good bounce back game for you guys that have Miami Hurricane players, particularly Jalen Knighton and Tyler Van Dyke at quarterback. Switching gears and changing conferences now, let's get into the Big 12. And Texas, obviously, no Bijan Robinson. Let's see how that plays out. The one thing that I do think you guys need to be aware of a little bit is sometimes you have to be aware of missing the boat and chasing points. And I know I mentioned this earlier in the year that you see a game like Casey Thompson had last week against Kansas that happened to be a track meet. Casey Thompson accounts for 7 touchdowns, 6 passing, 1 rushing. And now all of a sudden, a lot of you guys are really looking to get in on Casey Thompson in this road matchup at West Virginia. West Virginia can give up some points. I think they had that high scoring affair a few weeks back at home against Iowa State. I'm really not so sure about this matchup this week with Casey Thompson. It does make me a little bit nervous for you guys looking to get on board the Casey Thompson train. I just don't know if I believe in it that much. I was a big fan of Xavier Worthy last week. As you noticed, he was up there in the projections pretty high. He's the one player that I do really like in that Texas offense. He's their one playmaker that they truly have. I just don't know if Casey Thompson's going to be enough for you guys on the road this weekend at West Virginia. So pay attention to that. Iowa State at Oklahoma, a big matchup in the Big 12. Iowa State coming off that loss to Texas Tech. Oklahoma coming off a loss as well. That'll be curious to see how these teams bounce back. But we know that Breece Hall has been money. And really, I think more importantly in this matchup, those of you that are debating whether or not to go with Caleb Williams, the projections are almost finalized. They should be uploaded on the site by the time you guys wake up in the morning on Thursday morning. If not, they will be posted sometime tomorrow morning, and we'll get those uploaded as soon as possible. Chandler Morris, tough going, great game against Baylor a couple of weeks ago, tough sledding on the road at Oklahoma State last week, but this should be a bounce back game and a good week to possibly roll the dice with a player like Chandler Morris in the semifinals with a home matchup against Kansas. So that's what I really see that jumps out at me in the Big 12, guys. Let's go into the Big 10. A lot of questions coming in, I think, on Kenneth Walker this week. That big matchup, Michigan State on the road at Ohio State. That's a big number right there, 18.5. A lot of you guys really on the fence about Kenneth Walker up until this point. I get it. It's a really, really, really tough decision to make for some of you guys. But if we just want to break it down a little bit more in a simplistic way to look at it, let's look at it this way. In every matchup this year, and this includes the matchup against Michigan, Kenneth Walker still carried the ball 23 times, 197 and 5 touchdowns. He has scored in all but three, and he scored against Indiana. He did not score against Indiana, Nebraska, and Miami. I think he's scored in all but 2 games this year. He's going to get a heavy workload. There's no doubt about that. When you look at Ohio State, and this is just try to give you guys some context in regards to Kenneth Walker, because I know there's a lot of questions coming in on him. He's also going up against an Ohio State defense that's only given up about a little over 100 yards per game on the ground. If you're starting Kenneth Walker this weekend, you're going to need a little bit of a good fortune on the road against a really good Ohio State defense. This is really a week where your roster depth is going to be challenged and you've got to make a decision. Or it's one of those weeks where you're just going to have to ride it out. And you know what? If it's a week where you have to ride it out and your hands are tied and your hands forced, there's nothing that you could do about it. Think a couple of weeks ago, and I mentioned this, when all of you owners that had Missouri running back Tyler Beatty, it may be in a must-win situation in which you needed to pull something out, and they were going and playing Georgia. It was just bad luck. The schedule, the way that it worked out, they were playing Georgia. You knew you probably weren't going to get much. Beatty wasn't ranked incredibly high that week at all. This is going to be one of those weeks where I think you may have to roll with Kenneth Walker, but you're also going to have to keep your fingers crossed too and kind of hope that Michigan State can keep it close and he could really, really grind out some carries in that matchup. In regards to other matchups in that conference, nothing really jumps out at me other than the fact that Braylon Allen is your running back one at Wisconsin. Emphatically big week last week. And with Ches Malisi out of the way, a lot of you guys, Allen's going to help bring some of you guys, particularly those of you in Power 5 only leagues, into maybe the championship game this week, a nice matchup at home against Nebraska. Switching gears in G5 to the Conference USA and what could possibly be one of the biggest wild card plays of the week is if Southern Miss, which last week they started Frank Gore Jr. at quarterback and he left and got hurt. We need to get a status update on Gore this week, because when Gore left the game, they threw in redshirt freshman wide receiver Antavius Willis at quarterback, and Willis finished with 19 rushing attempts last week. If Willis is going to be quarterback this week, and we don't have any official word on that, you now have a quarterback with wide receiver eligibility available in the semifinal weeks of the college fantasy football playoffs. And Willis rushed the ball 19 times for 46 yards, and with no other receivers, with no other quarterbacks healthy. And if Frank Gore's out, they then have to lean on Willis possibly at quarterback. And I'm assuming Dejon Richard at running back for you guys really in desperation mode. That might not be a bad spot in deep leagues where you have a flex option to maybe pick up an Antavius Willis if he gets to start for Southern Miss at quarterback with the potential to get 20 rushing attempts. That's hard to pass up. And the other really thing that sticks out at me, two notes of interest in Conference USA. Rice, tight end, that's been a stud up until this point for a lot of you guys. Jordan Myers did not play last week. I don't have a status update on him right now, and I don't know if he's going to be able to go. And I know a lot of owners were probably bit last week, but him not playing, they're playing at UTEP this week. I'd err on the side of caution and assume that he's not going to play. And then also we have running back FIU, Diontae Price. I think he's going to be out again for a second straight game. And so I think you need to make plans accordingly for all of you guys sitting on Diontae Price. And look, at this particular point of the season, if a player's not going to play for you at this point, you're probably just going to drop them all together. And even if you're sitting on a Diontae Price and you're not going to play him and you're in a redraft league, you may as well drop him right now or drop. Matter of fact, this goes for any player that you don't plan on starting this week. You may as well drop them right now and play the waiver wire right now. Pick up a free agent right now for week 13. If you think that there's not only just a spot where you could play them, but a player out there that you think maybe your opponent might pick up to start against you in week 13. You know, I just threw out Antavius Willis, wide receiver of Southern Miss. You may not need him, but the guy, the person that you're playing may pick him up. You may want to block that move. So that's something to consider in you know, with Antavius Willis out there. If he happens to get some type of a start out there, you guys may want to just scoop him up to keep him away from your competition. That's something to think about too. Sometimes to play that keep away game is the way to go. Looking at over at the independent matchups that are not playing any conference teams, because I know there are some independents playing some teams in conferences. One that jumps out, UMass at Army. I believe Christian Anderson has already been tabbed the starter. That may be something that interests you guys this week in that matchup against UMass if you're in desperate need of a quarterback, if he's going to go ahead and get to go. And then, you know, I'm just going to knock out some of the other ones right now. While we're here, BYU playing on the road at Georgia Southern. Good week for BYU. Jalen Hall, Tyler Algier. I think you've got to roll with those guys. The big question is whether or not Gunnar Romney is actually going to return for BYU. I think that's the one that you have to be a little concerned about if you're an owner there. We haven't seen him, and I think you've got to err on the side of caution as well with that one. Connecticut playing Central Florida. You know, the question, what's going to go on with running back there for UCF? You know, Bowser, you've got Richardson in the mix. You've got Mark Anthony Richards now in the fold as well. I'd be a little cautious with that matchup as well. And I just wanted to throw that out while we got into the independents. Mac is actually there's all but one game that's going to be played. We're going to have Kent State playing at Akron. So you guys, you know, with Dustin Crum, Dante Cephas, maybe, you know, Williams or Cooper at running back, you know, there's still going to be some action on the weekend in that matchup as well. And then moving out of the Mid-American Conference, moving into the Mountain West, anything that really jumps out at me, curious to see how that Nevada matchup against Air Force shakes out. This isn't the week if I had Carson Strong or one of those Nevada receivers that I'm really excited this week because of that matchup. Now, it is at home. That's the one thing I do like about that matchup for Nevada is that it is at home. If it was at Air Force, I'd be a little bit more concerned. And then UNLV is at home. Charles Williams has been absolutely lights out for UNLV. It's hard to see that happening again. And here we go. Just another one of those situations where, you know, you've got a good player that's just up against the schedule this week in Charles Williams against a stout San Diego State run defense. The only thing that may save UNLV a little bit is they do get a home matchup. And I'm curious if that will play into their favor, but I still think that San Diego State defense will stifle Charles Williams and that running game for UNLV. That's the one that really jumps out at me as far as keep an eye, playing the matchup game there. Going over into the Pac-12, obviously Sean McGrew did not play last week for Washington, so we've got to watch that situation. I think they said he's going to dress. I thought I heard some whispers or read that he might have like a bum ankle, maybe a broken finger or whatnot. Keep tabs on that. But I think that's one that you really have to stay away from. Maybe Cameron Davis would be a nice grab on a waiver wire in a deep league as well. UCLA, as of today, as of yesterday, I believe Britton Brown wasn't practicing. If he doesn't practice, that plays into the hands of Zach Charbonnet owners. Jackson Dart reportedly getting the start for the USC offense at quarterback. That'll be interesting as well. Will Tanner McKee come back for Stanford? That does affect guys like maybe Ben Urisic at tight end for Stanford. And then the big matchup, Oregon at Utah. And I would have to think that Tavion Thomas was held out last week out of precaution, and he's ready to rock and roll in that big matchup at home against the Oregon Ducks. We'll go over G5 with Sunbelt before we finish up with the SEC. I don't think Reese White will be playing again. That's really good for you guys and owners of Shamari Jones, maybe Braden Bennett as well this weekend. When I look at the other matchups throughout the Sun Belt, there's nothing really that jumps out at me other than the fact that you may have to be a little cautious with Jalen Tolbert, wide receiver for South Alabama, playing on the road at Tennessee. That's really the only one that jumps out at me as far as being cautious for that one. And then we're going to end things at the SEC, and the SEC does have some crossover with the Sun Belt, particularly with LSU hosting UL Monroe, which is a really, excuse me, guys, I'm a little bit under the weather, as you could tell. Found it sound a little nasally, but we spoke about the matchups with Kenneth Walker III playing playing Ohio State. We spoke about the matchup of Charles Williams playing against San Diego State. Well, here we are now with a good matchup for Tyrion Davis Price for LSU, getting a home matchup in Week 12 against UL Monroe. And I would think that there's a lot of owners right now that are debating getting him into their lineups and bumping some other player that's probably gotten them up until this point that they've been using every week. I think Tyrion Davis Price could be one of those players that happen to make the cut for a lot of fantasy owners this weekend at home in that matchup against Sunbelt opponent UL Monroe. Ole Miss gets Vanderbilt. It was nice to see Dontaria Drummond get back into that lineup for Ole Miss. I think that does help Matt Corral out a little bit. Interestingly enough, I looking at the projections, and they're not uploaded onto the site through the first run in which I have made. It doesn't look like Corral made the top 10. That's probably rightly so, given the past few weeks of how that offense has kind of taken form. But getting Drummond back does help. Home matchup against Vandy certainly helps. But I would imagine by the time that those projections get one more run through, there's a chance Corral could crack into the top 10 this week. If not, he's going to be really close in there. Obviously, Bo Nix being lost for the year at Auburn, that does affect him. For all you fantasy owners, move away from there. Arkansas playing on the road at Alabama. And I know a lot of you guys that have KJ Jefferson and Treylon Burks are probably doubting using those two guys. And I can't blame you right there. I feel like, and I've said this several weeks ago, that Treylon Burks was going to be boom or bust. I think he was going to be a 4 or 5 catch guy for 100 yards and a touchdown, or he was going to end up being a 3 or 4 catch guy with 25 yards and no score. It's either high ceiling, low floor with Burks. And I do think that there's a chance that some of you guys sit Burks. I know if I had him, I would really be contemplating sitting Burks if I felt that my wide receiver depth was really good in this matchup, because I'd feel like I'd be hanging my hat on one big catch against that Alabama defense. And the only thing that really, really deters me from starting him isn't Burks' talent, and it isn't the Alabama defense necessarily. I just don't know if I trust KJ Jefferson enough against that Alabama defense. And that's the one thing for me that concerns me if you have Burks. Texas A&M playing at home against Prairie View A&M. This is one of the situations when I look at all of the matchups across the board in these SEC, FCS, or matchups that in which they're just overmatched. This is the one matchup where I think could come back to hurt some people. I don't think Texas A&M is going to have any problems with Prairie View A&M. I think this is going to be one of the rare cases, or one of the rare instances this year where, if Spiller and Ashane doesn't get theirs early, I'll say that even for Jalen Weidenmeyer and Anaya Smith as well, this could be an early exit for them, maybe halftime. Early projections, and that's why I'm kind of fumbling through the computer right now. Early projections right now have both of those guys with 89 yards and a touchdown apiece minimum. But I also can see guys like Amari Daniels, L.J. Johnson Jr. getting in the game as well and kind of bringing that game home for A&M. I don't think that the Aggies are necessarily going to risk injury to Spiller and Ashane late in that matchup. I think both of those, I wouldn't be surprised if both of those guys have gotten the hook by the middle of the third quarter. That's the only overwhelming matchup that I think you really have to watch out for. I don't think you have to worry about Tennessee. I think Tennessee's going to score a ton of points. I think you don't have to worry about Ole Miss against Vanderbilt. I think they're going to score points. I think if you've got LSU players, I think you're hoping UL Monroe score a couple of touchdowns against that LSU defense. I don't know if that's going to happen, but I do think that Tyrion Davis-Price is a nice play. I think if you got Mississippi State against Tennessee State, going back to Mike Leach's days at Washington State when they played FCS opponents, I think you're going to see Will Rogers get in that game and throw at least 300 yards and 4 touchdowns before he makes an exit. So I think that puts all of the Mississippi State receivers in play for that matchup against Tennessee State as well. You've got Kentucky at home against New Mexico State. New Mexico State was routed by Alabama last week. I do think New Mexico State may be able to score against Kentucky and keep it close enough to where those Kentucky starters are playing late in that matchup as well. I think if you have Georgia players, it's another matchup where I don't think you're going to get a lot out of them. I think you're going to get less out of the Georgia players than you're going to get out of the Texas A&M players, but you've got to start that Georgia defense. Had an email come in this week about starting Georgia's defense or Oklahoma State with Georgia with a 50% penalty playing an FCS opponent. And given the scoring system of the league, I almost feel like you've got to ride Georgia no matter if there's a penalty or not in this matchup. There's a chance they throw a shutout. There's a chance they limit Charleston Southern to less than 200 yards. And there's always a chance they're going to bring one back to the house and get you some sacks and turnovers. And then lastly, Florida at Missouri. After what happened with last week against Samford, Florida ran up the score. Big week if you had my friend of the CFF site, Emory Jones. I'm sure he's a big fan of the site if he ever listened to any of these shows all year. No, but in all seriousness, I worry that this game, when sometimes when I look at the projections and I'm going through them and I'm sort of tailoring them or giving them some final checkups, I see the total for this game at 70 points, and I'm having a really tough time with seeing, and I could be wrong. I hope I'm wrong for you guys, where this game's going to get up that high. I'm worried if last week's matchup against Samford really inflated that total. I don't know if this game can get to 70. Matter of fact, of all the plays on the board, I actually like the under in this matchup. And for college fantasy football purposes, I hope I'm wrong. But I do think there's going to be plenty enough touches for Tyler Beatty. I think there's going to be a chance for you guys that have held on to Emory Jones or picked him up in that matchup last week. He gets this matchup against a Missouri defense that's given up over 200 yards per game on the ground. I think he's going to probably get at least 40, 50 on the ground, possibly a touchdown. Florida gets Florida State next week. Emory Jones is a nice late season pickup. I'm curious to see if he can pull something through this weekend. But for a lot of you guys that are struggling with matchups, that's a player that might be out there on some waiver wires that could pull you through in an easy matchup this week. And I do think a player like Dameon Pierce is obviously in play as well, who I think has a chance to score a couple of touchdowns on the ground. And then in that Missouri offense, for me, it's Tyler Beatty. I have a problem seeing, I just don't see where else they're going to get points. And if they do, I think they're going to have a tough time finding them. But I do think that Beatty could find the end zone a couple of times against a Florida defense that just got absolutely smashed last week against Samford. So that's it, guys. That takes us through the entire Week 12 slate. Here we are, semifinal week. Mention it again, money weeks. And if there's one thing that you guys, when you hit the button to close this show out, that you take away from this week is evaluate where you're at going into this weekend's matchups. Take a look at your opponent. Do you have to play aggressive? Do you have to play conservatively? And do not overthink it, guys. Ride the studs that have gotten you to the dance. Ride it out with them. That's what I say. Unless it's just completely obvious the matchup is the play, ride it out. And in more times than not, the matchup is the play to sit a guy than it is to start a guy. That's my advice this week. Enjoy it. Have fun. Semifinals. Enjoy it. Money week. You win this week, you're guaranteed second place. Good luck to everyone out there closing out their leagues this week. Thank you guys for joining us along this ride. Keep tuning in. Next week, championship week, week 13. We're glad to have you guys. The numbers are showing that you guys are still coming back every week, even though I know there's a number of you guys that are eliminated. And don't forget to keep checking on the site. In the coming weeks, we're going to have more stuff for those bowl season and the bowl season fantasy guide. That's it for week 12 show. My name's Joe DeSalvo, the voice of the CFF site. Good luck, everyone. I'll see you guys next week, championship week, week 13.